James Harden is a 6'5" shooting guard who has had a historic career in his 9 years in the NBA. His career started with the Oklahoma City Thunder as he came off the bench for an up-and-coming team that featured Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant. By his third year in the NBA, James Harden was named Sixth Man of the Year and contributed to the Oklahoma City Thunder making it to the NBA Finals. After losing to 5 with the Miami Heat, the Oklahoma City Thunder prematurely traded James Harden to the Houston Rockets, where his solo career took off. With the Houston Rockets, James Harden has been a consistent 25 to 27 point scorer while giving you roughly around 5 to 6 rebounds, 7 to 8 assists, sometimes even more, and shooting splits that vary between the low 40s to mid 40s, but particularly he has been known over the last few years with his high volume from behind the arc while consistently shooting around 34 to 35% from three-point land. Also, James Harden has gone to the free throw line way more times than many people, including myself, believe that he should have been. However, offensively, he has definitely been known for one of the greatest threats in the NBA, at least over the past 5 seasons, which is extremely impressive because when you consider that James Harden has already been selected to 5 All-NBA teams, he's finished second in the MVP race 2 out of the last 3 seasons, and a lot of people, including myself, believes that he will win the MVP this season. And James Harden, just statistically speaking, if he were to retire next season, he would immediately be a first ballot Hall of Famer. But that still does not capture how great of a player James Harden potentially can be. Now, don't get me wrong, I definitely understand James Harden has massive flaws in his game. For the most part of his career, he has shown laughable effort on the defensive end, and he turns the ball over at a historic rate, which is a huge reason why I really don't necessarily know how I feel about James Harden, especially when it comes to ranking him amongst all-time greats. But to some people, if James Harden is able to do what he's always been able to do, which is perform at an elite level on the offensive end, then to some people that is enough to compare him to all-time great players. So with this year coming to a conclusion, as James Harden had another great historic regular season, led his team to the conference finals again, and had a 3-2 lead against the Golden State Warriors, even though I understand that Chris Paul was hurt and he missed both games 6 and 7, if James Harden is supposed to be as great as many of us believe, I assume that he should be able to at least steal one of the games against the Golden State Warriors. And not only was he unable to do so, but James Harden played so poorly that he was historically inefficient from behind the three-point line in Game 7, which then reminded me of the biggest flaw in James Harden's career and his legacy, and that is, has James Harden ever had an elite level postseason run throughout his entire career, or is he just a regular season performer? What's up YouTube, it's the one and only legend of winning, aka FLAW, and in today's video we will be discussing what is holding back James Harden's career and legacy from taking the next step. Because like I said in my intro, James Harden has already done more than enough to make himself a Hall of Famer. But as many of us believe, James Harden is a great enough player for him not to just be labeled as a Hall of Famer. Ranking him amongst some all-time great players is obviously the next step in his legacy. However, there are definitely flaws in his career and his game that continues to hold him back from that discussion, and that is his performances in the postseason. And I want to be very clear on this. This year is not the first time that James Harden has underperformed in the postseason, and it starts all the way back in OKC. In the 2012 season, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and Kevin Durant were able to lead the Oklahoma City Thunder all the way to the NBA Finals. And giving credit to the Oklahoma City Thunder, because I definitely believe a lot of people have forgotten how close some of these games were, they were able to push them to a very competitive 5-game series. But unfortunately, due to the lack of productivity from other players, including James Harden, the series ended prematurely in my opinion, and I believe if Kevin Durant had any other consistent help offensively from any of his other teammates, then it would have been a different series. And James Harden was easily the biggest culprit when it comes to the lack of productivity, as James Harden recorded 12 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, but he shot below 40% from the field, 32% from behind the arc, and below 80% from the free throw line. Fast forward through the 2013-2014 season, the Houston Rockets found themselves with home court advantage in the first round of playoffs against the Portland Trail Blazers, but again, James Harden underperforms, as he indeed recorded 27 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals, however, turned the ball over at a ridiculous rate. shot below 40% from the field and below 30% from behind the arc, as the Houston Rockets would lose in 6 games. Then we move on to the next season. Yet again, James Harden in the 2014-2015 season played great during the regular season, led the Houston Rockets to a 50-win season as well, and when he made it to the playoffs, he was able to lead his team past the Dallas Mavericks in the first round. But then that leads us to the infamous Clippers versus Houston Rockets series, as the Clippers, as we all know, blew a 3-1 lead. And I think many people attempt to credit too much to James Harden's impact on that series, when the reality is that in the game 6 that many people tend to remember during that series, James Harden was playing so poorly, as he was shooting 25% from the field, that Kevin McHale was forced to bench him in the fourth quarter, in which that is the quarter the Houston Rockets were able to mount their comeback and ended that quarter with 40 points to the Clippers 15. And even in game 7, I think many people just look at how many points someone scores without looking at the percentages. Yes, James Harden recorded 31 points that game. However, he shot 35% from the field, 28% from behind the arc, and turned the ball over 7 times. Then moving on to the 2016 season, the Houston Rockets, they did struggle pretty significantly during the regular season. However, James Harden as an individual performer, he was fine. Led his team to the playoffs and matched up with the Golden State Warriors. And I know many people are going to say, well, it's the Warriors. However, Curry only played 2 of the 4 games during that series. And again, if James Harden is supposed to be as great as we're suspecting him to be, why is it that he's shooting yet again 41% from the field and 31% from behind the arc? And again, the turnovers are just ridiculous. Moving on to the 2016-2017 season, and yet again, James Harden, he checks off all of the regular season boxes. And in the postseason, yet again, he just underperformed. Matching up against the Oklahoma City Thunder in the first round with just quote-unquote Russell Westbrook, as that was the narrative at the time, he underperformed immensely from the field, shot poorly all over, and it just doesn't make any sense. But somehow, some way, especially credited to his teammates, made it to the second round. And in the second round, when given the opportunity, as Kawhi Leonard sat out in game 6, to push it to a game 7, James Harden infamously had arguably the worst performance of his career, at least up until that moment, as James Harden in game 6 only recorded 10 points, turned the ball over 6 times, and shot 2 for 11 from the field. Both of his shot attempts that he made were from behind the arc, as he shot 2 for 9 from 3-point land. And also be very mindful that the years that I was referring to, through those years in James Harden's career, he was known as someone who gave a laughable effort on the defensive end. So he doesn't play defense, turns the ball at a ridiculous rate, and even though he scores 25 to 30 plus points during the postseason, his efficiency is so god-awful that it ends up hurting his team in the long run. But just like before, I started to hear people attempt to justify and give excuses to why James Harden underperformed during the postseason. I heard everything from, oh, he carries so much of an offensive load that it justifies him not to give that much effort on the defensive end. Or I heard that he handles the ball way too many times. That's the reason why he turns the ball over at the rate that he does. Again, just excuses that, in my opinion, aren't that valid, especially if we're going to compare him to all-time greats. However, that thus brings us into this last season. With the addition of PJ Tucker, the development of Clint Capella, and also players that were on his team in previous seasons, such as Eric Gordon and Trevor Ariza, quite frankly, you have a team that is defensive minded and offensive potent enough for James Harden not to be held to any different standard than any other player that he consistently is being compared to. But then ironically enough, you add in Chris Paul, who too is a ball handler, who somehow plays defense at an elite level and who doesn't turn the ball over at a historic rate, but yet no one doesn't give him credit for that. But at bare minimum, Chris Paul, because of the responsibility that he will continue to bear on this team, should again relieve some responsibility from James Harden. So you would assume that James Harden would perform in the postseason, but yet again, he really didn't do so. Again, James Harden during the regular season checks off all of the boxes, posts up ridiculous numbers, has stretches of greatness and brilliance that is unheard of, and leads his team to one of the best records in the NBA. But in the postseason, there was never a moment of dominance that you felt from James Harden that put him in a whole nother status of all-time greatness. And as I wrap up this video, let me be extremely clear about something. No one is expecting James Harden to win a championship anytime soon, let alone make it to the NBA Finals, because we all know the obstacle that he must overcome, which is a ridiculous team with the Golden State Warriors. However, what many people are expecting, and quite frankly, I don't even think these expectations are outlandish, is for him to be a consistent scorer in the postseason, especially when you consider that we've already lowered the bar and come to accept the fact that he's not an elite level defender, and actually for a huge portion of his career, I would argue he was a defensive liability, and he turns the ball over at a ridiculous rate. And quite frankly, if you look at some of his teammates, they either perform to their expectations or some of them even overachieve. However, James Harden, the fact that he is an inconsistent scorer with all of those things in his favor is unacceptable. Now, why exactly does this happen? Many people point out to the fact that fatigue plays a major factor, and I honestly believe that that is a credible argument, especially over the past 2 years with Mike D'Antoni being your head coach and he's running 7-man rotations, which are ridiculous. However, in my opinion, there is a bigger flaw in James Harden's game, a flaw that will inevitably, unless he change, hold his legacy back to his true potential, and that is the lack of moves in his offensive arsenal that allows him to score. For whatever reason, and quite frankly, I do not know why, James Harden has oversimplified his offensive skill set to basically passing, step back threes, layups, and getting to the free throw line. And I would dare say majority of the time when James Harden is attempting to score, he is looking for a foul. And during the regular season, this works out great for him, as you have some amateur referees, or in general, more fouls are being called during the regular season than they do in the postseason. And so when you have a player such as James Harden, who in my opinion is way too skilled to operate like this, however, when James Harden does overly depend, and yes, the key word is depend, on getting calls from the referees, then you could clearly see how that would affect his efficiency, along with the fact that it may actually make it easier for the opposing team to defend him. But if we're not talking about theories and just sticking to facts, the facts is this: James Harden is a great regular season performer who's been on great teams who've been able to make it to the conference finals despite his underperformance in the postseason. And quite frankly, until I see James Harden performing to the same standard and expectations that we hold him to and that he's able to execute during the regular season, I quite frankly don't see that much growth in James Harden's legacy. And I really need to stop seeing people claim that James Harden is better than D Wade, because that's just ridiculous. But with that being said, people, I'll see you all next time. Peace.